case I fear the dog barking. Hey, everyone. It's Dr. Naomi Wolf on DailyClout, and I'm here with two of my personal heroes, the amazing Amy Kelly, whom you all know because she is the completely incomprehensibly fantastic reason the Pfizer Documents Volunteers project really exists and moves as beautifully as it does, now reaching almost or probably 50 reports. Extraordinary. Mm-hmm. That's Amy Kelly, our DailyClout COO and project director of the War Room DailyClout Pfizer Documents Research Volunteer efforts. And also with us today in his role as expert and distinguished DailyClout commentator is Dr. Chris Flowers. And he is one of the most valued and prolific and extraordinary members of the Pfizer Documents Volunteers team, and he's got an extraordinary bio, which I can share with you. And he is a professor of pathology. I'm so sorry.
Professor of radiology.
Radiology. That's what happens when Naomi doesn't have the bio right in front of me. And author of many peer-reviewed papers. And he is, just to remind you all, he is the expert who made the groundbreaking and globally covered broke the story in spring of this past year that Pfizer knew, and thus the FDA knew, 4 months before they announced it, the government announced it to America's parents, the world's parents, that 35 minors or young adults had their hearts damaged and had myocarditis or pericarditis or other forms of heart damage within a week after injection from the mRNA vaccine. So he's broken many important stories. Since then, we're really honored to have him. And I'll just launch right in. And this is live stream, so everybody, send us comments, questions. But there's a bombshell newest report, December 26th, 2022, by War Room DailyClout Pfizer Documents Analysis Project Post-Marketing Team. And the bottom line, the headline is another instance of mass murder. I'm just going to put it that way. They don't have to. They're scientists. They're doctors. I'm a journalist. Looks like mass murder to me that was concealed in these documents. Report 50, so another milestone report. 20% of post-injection strokes were fatal in the 90 days following the Pfizer COVID mRNA vaccine rollout. 1 in 5 of the people who got injected with the Pfizer mRNA vaccine who had a stroke-like event died of it. And over to you, Dr. Flowers, Amy Kelly. Is that a correct summary of what's in this report?
Yes, if anything, it's an underestimate. But the key is, it's back to the same old, this was safe and effective. Mm-hmm. That they were pushing at that time, as you know, endlessly on TV, all the pundits, all the bigwigs, they were all telling us we had to get the vaccine and it was perfectly safe. Mm. But it's getting more and more clear as we spend time going through the documents that the safety aspects of any vaccine trial were basically ignored. And I've even found out even more disturbing things coming out of the European Medicines Agency, in that they don't even require the safety testing. They don't even require the distribution and excretion of a vaccine to be covered, to be approved for use in patients. And
let me just jump in there and try to understand what I think I just heard you say, Dr. Flowers. You're saying that the 1 in 5 people who sustained a stroke event dying is an understatement, and we'll get to the details of that. And I'm just quoting from the piece. Within the stroke data set, there were 275 patients with 300 different events reported. This is within 3 months of the mRNA injection, the Pfizer injection, and 20% of the stroke events were fatal. And this is only a 90-day period starting on December 1st, 2020, which is when the UK publicly rolled out the experimental vaccine product. And 3 months after that, there were, I'm going to say this again, 275 patients with 300 different stroke-like events, and 1 in 5 of those 275 patients died. So that would be what, like what's 1 in 5 of 275? Someone do the math quickly.
It's 20%.
It's about 22%.
Yeah.
Right, but how many people is that? How many people died?
61 known patients died.
Unbelievable.
Known and reported.
In 3 months. In 3 months.
In
one
3
country.
months. But the problem is that there's a huge number of patients who had this had the stroke, whose resolution or outcome is not known and not reported, even though they're supposed to follow this up for 2 years, and we can't find the data on these patients. What was their final outcome? And I mean, there's, by statistical analysis, there's bound to be more people that have actually died, which will inflate that number.
So it could be more than 61 out of 275 people who had
Correct.
stroke-like events. And then the other thing you said, Dr. Flowers, a few beats ago, is that you were shocked to find that the European Medical Agency, is that the name of the agency?
Yes, correct.
Which is the equivalent of our FDA, is that correct? It's supposed to make sure that the medicines and medications and drugs are safe for all the people of Europe, that they're not even checking safety for all medications or for these vaccines?
That is correct. It's for vaccines, they don't have to do the biodistribution that, for example, Pfizer did in those rats, the original WinStar rat study. If you remember, when we found that it didn't stay in the deltoid, but within 2 hours was in the liver, ovaries, testes, etc., that helped us realize this platform that we were looking at and reporting on the side effects and the adverse events was far more widespread than you would anticipate. But if Europe had its way, say this was purely done by BioNTech in Germany, and they had done it, they wouldn't have even needed to do the pharmacokinetic study, because it's not.
What does pharmacokinetic mean?
Pharmacokinetics basically means what happens to a drug when it gets put in a body, how is it metabolized and how is it excreted, and its distribution within the body, and it's what are the effects of that drug being in the body in those particular organs.
Right.
So you can imagine how that reflects back to what we've been discussing.
Totally. So, Amy, would you kindly check your phone? I have a question for you. And and Dr. Flowers, so this is stunning. You're saying that this agency, which is for all the millions of people of all of the countries of Europe, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, all those countries, they trust and believe that there are these basic tests being done of these vaccines before they are put in the bodies of European men, women, and children, and you found that they are not being done. What's your source for that?
I only have this as a secondary source. It's from another researcher who's actually based in Australia, Dr. Jeff Payne, PhD.
He's very good. Yeah,
he's very good and reliable. I have great respect for the work that he's been doing. But I've also, I've been sort of notifying some of the European members of Parliament, like Rob Roos, for example, the Dutch MEP, who brought up this thing about transmission and grilling Pfizer in the European Parliament.
Yes.
So I've sort of raised that as something that they really need to look at.
Right.
Because I mean, okay, for drugs, people accept that, but why should vaccines? Well, no, they accept that you should have safety tests, but I think the approach to vaccines has been so different because there's never any serious side effects. I mean, it's just conspiracy theories.
Right.
Now we've got Pfizer in their own data actually showing us this evidence in the first 90 days.
Right.
I mean, that in itself, the post-marketing experience report is 5.3.6.
Right.
It's providing us really as investigators with an endless stream of all sorts of information that is just gobsmacking.
That's shocking. Well, so let me just assure our audience, who always like primary sources, that we're going to reach out to Dr. Payne and get his source for his conclusion that Europe is not being properly protected by their version of the FDA. And we'll post that on DailyClout, and maybe even do a follow-up interview with Dr. Payne if he's willing, because that is big news. And let me go back then to the big news in this stroke piece. So what you're saying, Dr. Flowers and Amy Kelly, by all means jump in, is that the source of these, 1 in 5 people dying of the group that had stroke-like events is a document within the Pfizer documents, which I just want to remind everyone, I always do, but no such thing as too much repetition, that these are 55,000 documents, meaning many thousands more, because each document can have hundreds or thousands of pages in it, that these experts that Dr. Flowers is helping to lead, that Amy Kelly is helping to lead, have gone through, and these are documents that were released under court order via a lawsuit by Aaron Siri and his legal firm, and the FDA sought to have them hidden for 75 years. And I think, Dr. Flowers, that this bombshell about 61 people out of 275 who had stroke-like events 3 months after the actual rollout, is one of the things they were certainly hoping no one would ever stumble upon. So let me go back to, sorry.
I would like to jump in just for a second on this too.
Please.
Another very noteworthy aspect of this report, in my opinion, is that when you're looking at adverse events in the Pfizer documents, there are non-serious ones and there are serious ones. And in the case of these stroke adverse events that happened in the first 90 days after the rollout, all of them were marked as serious.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's an important aspect of it as well.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
just think, Naomi,
Yeah.
when someone has a stroke, it's not just whether they die or not. Remember what happens to most people who've had strokes. It depends on which side of the brain it affects, whether they lose their language and are unable to speak, or whether they have paralysis. It is a serious thing, even if they do not die.
Exactly. So the 210 plus people who didn't die, of these 275 people in the adverse events group related to strokes in one country in 3 months after the rollout, they could be paralyzed, they could have lost the power of speech, they could be in a vegetative state. And you also are saying, Dr. Flowers, that a lot of the follow-up or the knowledge of what happened to them is missing. Is it missing in an unusual way? Like, would a real scientific follow-up, not lose what happened to 210 of the subjects? And I just want to note, we've seen this before with the pregnancy part of the Pfizer documents, where a majority of the records were lost. So, Dr. Flowers, what would you say to that question?
We find it in everything we've been looking at, every different problem with the body systems. That it was in the Pfizer protocol that they were supposed to record the outcomes of these adverse events for up to 2 years later.
Right.
And we're looking through the documents. There is no follow-up that we have been given. Now, maybe it's available, but it's hidden to us still.
Right.
And maybe a further FOIA may be necessary to get that data. But we keep running up against this brick wall where we see these patients who've got serious adverse events. And we really want to know, well, what was the outcome? Did they survive? It's the same with myocarditis and things like that. That there is a lot of missing data which doesn't help us in our analysis.
So let me, So let me kind of restate in lay terms what you've said, and I recognize it from other reports. Basically, this is yet another example of something that you all have found time and time again, that Pfizer didn't follow its own rules, right? Protocols are stated parameters and requirements of a study. Is that correct? That's what a protocol is in this context?
Correct. And it's the FDA are supposed to be making sure that the trial is performed according to the
protocols. Understood. And so this is yet another example of Pfizer not doing what it said it would do, and the FDA, not performing its regulatory function. Would you say, Dr. Flowers, that making sure a trial is conducted according to trial protocols is a core regulatory function of the agency that is the FDA?
I believe so, and that's how they used to do it.
Right.
I mean, even with the swine flu, they had just a few serious adverse events, and they pulled the vaccine. They
Right.
pulled it during the trial.
Right.
And yet here we are with huge numbers. They occurred very, very early on, way before this post-marketing experience document was being produced.
Right.
They knew even at the interim analysis stage of the trial before the EUA that there were serious adverse events. But because the Pfizer doctors had turned around every single time
Right.
and say, oh, well, these are no serious safety signal has been identified in these reports. You know, it's absolute
61 dead people in one country from one adverse event subgroup, and they're saying no danger here, and the FDA is rubber stamping it basically, whereas in the past, like with this swine flu, they would have said, hold on a minute, 61 people have died in one country, we're going to stop everything, you're not following the protocols, this is not okay. So that didn't happen. A lot of people died. So I'm remiss in not having said this right at the outset. I want to read you Dr. Flower's bio, because this is a highly credentialed, highly distinguished person. One reason the Pfizer documents research volunteers are such a formidable intellectual fighting force is that they are so highly credentialed. They can't be dismissed as, wacky commentators or people engaged in conspiracy theory thinking. Dr. Chris Flowers is Associate Professor of Radiology, retired from the University of South Florida, previously Associate Professor of Radiology and Biomedical Imaging at UCSF, a very distinguished university as well, retired academic cancer radiologist, author, and scientific paper reviewer for multiple radiology journals. So he doesn't just write peer-reviewed papers, he is a peer reviewer. He is the one who looks at other scholars, other academics, other scientists' work and assesses whether it is good enough for an academic publication. So I just want you all to know that this man who is raising this alarm, is a gatekeeper in his clinical specialty. So let's go on to what the post-marketing document is. This kind of blew my mind when I understood it to mean post-marketing means after the ads, after the propaganda campaigns, after the influencers, after everyone is told it's safe and effective, and they line up, roll up their sleeves, get injected. That's what this document assesses, right? That's what post-marketing means. What happened then? Is that not correct?
Yes, indeed.
Isn't that backwards? Shouldn't all this testing have happened before marketing? Am I an idiot? What am I missing?
You're missing the fact that the phase 1 studies, which are basically the very first clinical trial, is supposed to show that the drug that is being presented for phase 2 and phase 3 trials, the later clinical trials, which look at both the dosage and then the basically, does it protect you or does it cure a disease? The first phase of a clinical trial is a safety phase.
Okay.
You want to know that it is safe.
Right. And did they not do that, or did they do it in the marketing?
This was extremely truncated. I mean, it was a minimal thing. Normally this takes years because, and every time you look at things like this, you've got to wait several years to make sure nothing has happened since someone has received this experimental intervention in their lives. It can be all sorts of things. And some of these things don't, as you know, like cancers, may not occur for months or years later.
So how
related to that?
Sorry. So how truncated were the phase 1 trials that on the basis of which this injection was called safe and effective? They were just months, right?
Basically, it's 6 months maximum,
right?
Instead of years,
right?
But even then, we're not really sure that the actual safety trials were basically performed according to what we would normally expect.
Right.
With this the Winstar rats, and that was virtually it.
Right.
Well, may I jump in for a moment, Naomi? To the other thing I find shocking about the post-marketing document is that it is that 3 months following the rollout
in Britain.
And it was first rolled out in the UK. It ended up collecting data from a lot of countries, but that is where it started.
Right.
is that in the appendix, there, I believe it was 1,290 adverse events of special interest were listed in the appendix of this document. And yet over and over again, as Dr. Flowers has pointed out, Pfizer's conclusion was there's no safety signal. That's alarming.
Unbelievable. And so in lay terms, what are the kinds of injuries, stroke category type problems that you guys found in the 5.3.6 cumulative analysis of post-authorization adverse events reports?
Well, basically, you've got two different types of stroke. You've got something called a hemorrhagic stroke, where basically you bleed into the brain. Then you've got one which is caused by a clot in one of the major blood vessels, like the carotid artery, which is in your neck. And that is treated by anticoagulants, which is why before anyone gets anticoagulants for a stroke, they have to have a brain scan, a CT or MRI, to make sure it's not a hemorrhagic stroke, because otherwise you would kill someone by treating them.
Right.
So there are two different types of stroke, and the distribution is similar to what you'd see in the normal population in a course of a few years. You know, that is normal. But there are two other different types of illness that are very, very severe that are related to this, which have been included in the stroke category, which are the central venous thrombosis and the venous sinus thrombosis. They're sort of related, but there are different parts of the base of the brain. But basically, when you get a clot there, it affects a whole load of things, including things inside the brain. Basically, the blood can't leave the brain properly. And the cavernous sinus, for example, it encompasses a large number of very major vessels and cranial nerves. Those are the things that affect, you know, your face and things like that. So may be a reason, for example, for some of the Bell's palsy that people get, things like that.
Oh, wow. Oh my God.
They are serious. They're serious events.
Right. I understand.
They often have serious outcomes.
So my understanding was also that those ones you just talked about are extremely rare as well.
Ordinary.
Is that correct?
The way it's described in medical literature is they're very rare. Now, when it says very rare, it does mean very rare. I mean, I can't give you an actual number, but you know, absolute data is not relevant. I think the real message is that they occurred within 1 to 41 days after the vaccine.
Unbelievable.
You know, 50% of these serious adverse events occurred within 48 hours of the vaccine being given.
Could you say that again, Dr. Flowers?
50% of the serious adverse events that we would classify as stroke or neurological like that occurred in the first 48 hours after vaccination.
Oh my God.
So, you know, that's not something else. This is vaccine related, period.
Right.
You know, their study allowed for up between 1 and 41 days post-vaccine, and they would accept that as being vaccine related. But, you know, there's not much doubt that it's a pretty immediate effect.
Right. For half the people, for half of these 275 people. The stroke, I'm just going to read this. The stroke category comprises the diagnoses of strokes attributed to either obstruction of blood flow through arteries to areas of the brain or due to bleeding around or into the brain. In this adverse event category, Pfizer included syndromes of diffuse venous clotting in and around the brain. You were just describing that, Dr. Flowers, and clotting in the venous pools within the skull. You were describing that as well. Arterial obstruction blocks oxygen-rich blood delivery, whereas the venous thrombosis prevents drainage of blood from within the head. And then it goes on to say that there were 275 patients with 300 different events. And the team highlights the fact that this is only a 90-day period starting on December 1st, 2020. And remember what was happening December 1st, 2020. It was, hooray, the vaccine is here. Everyone can celebrate. You can't go to, you know, meet with your friends unless you have this injection. It's safe and effective. It's safe and effective. That was happening in Britain as well as in the United States. And that was
remember there's another serious aspect to this as well, Naomi, is the population at risk from stroke and things are going to be the over 60s.
Right.
And of course, they were pushing the vaccine even harder for elderly people,
Right.
almost like they were trying to get rid of the elderly population.
I
You
mean,
know,
and what we don't know, or what's not broken down in here, is the age of these 275 people who suffered 300 stroke-like events in one country in 3 months, of which half of them died in or had the event within 2 days. I mean, I'm just saying, restating it in lay language. This is shocking. Now, let's move on. I mean, this is huge. So really extrapolating from this pool of patients, which was just the UK, just for 3 months, there must be hundreds of people who have died around the world in 14 months. Is that not a reasonable assumption?
Yeah, but can I just make a quick...
Hundreds or thousands, pardon me?
Let me make a quick correction first. Sure. It was within 90 days of all countries, basically, that were being given the BNT 162b2 vaccine.
Right. All right, well, let's do the math.
Approximately half of them were UK.
Right.
And then almost half were the USA, and then there were a mix of other countries as well.
Does that strike you as odd that this is a global rollout and the vast majority, once again, we found this once before, and the total of adverse events are in the UK and the US? Wouldn't you expect it to be more random in a global rollout, Dr. Flowers?
Absolutely. But then the distribution of the Pfizer vaccine was rather chaotic, shall we say, amongst many countries, with Pfizer trying to exploit governments.
Right.
As, for example, what happened in Uruguay and in Argentina and Brazil, you know, that we actually know about. So I'm in a sense, I wouldn't go all in and say, well, it's targeted against a Western population, but I mean, it's particularly fair to commentate that maybe that is a possibility.
Right. Right. Well, so let's, doing the math, that's 3 months. There were at least 60 people who died, 275 events. So it's now been what, 5 times 3 months at least, right? 6 times 3 months. So there must be globally hundreds of people who have died. I think that's a safe thing to say, right?
Yeah, this is just one dying of one thing.
Dying of one thing.
Look at all the other things we've shown.
Totally. I'm talking about just dying of this one thing that is the subject of this report. Well, now let's go to the mechanism, and then that's my last question. Many of us have seen people simply drop dead, on these videos. Young people drop dead, older people drop dead, people walking down the street drop dead. Also, I wrote a piece about brain damage based on and I'm a layperson, but based on my understanding of how lipid nanoparticles work. Could what you found here, which affects the brain and messes up the flow of blood to the brain, I'm again talking like 8th grade science, English major layperson, could that account for possibly some of the images we've seen of people dropping dead? Could that be a stroke-like event? And also, could there be less visible adverse events of the kinds of brain changes, personality changes, irritability, explosiveness, callousness, psychopathic behavior that so many people are reporting their loved ones? In other words, mini strokes maybe that are not even major enough to bring the person to the ER to get a brain scan, but could be degrading their brain function. Why don't you take those one at a time, those questions?
Well, let's stick with the sudden unexplained death syndrome. I think most commentators feel that is likely due to be the affectation of the electrical system within the heart itself. So people are getting arrhythmias and dying. That again could be due to the infiltration with the lipid nanoparticles, but it's mainly the spike protein, and I think Dr. Ryan Cole has shown that pretty remarkably. From the brain point of view, we know that lipid nanoparticles in of themselves are irritant to blood vessels and getting inside the brain, which are very, very sensitive blood vessels. I know I've been involved with treating young patients who've had blood clots in their brains. For example, this venous sinus thrombosis. using interventional radiology. And it's pretty devastating when people get these type of clot and an affection of the blood vessels. But the spike protein also causes a lot of inflammatory change, tends to be microvascular. So therefore, we won't see very much of an effect of that on the big blood vessels necessarily, although there is evidence that, people, for example, who are getting ruptured aortic aneurysms, like the commentator at the World Cup, who died of a young commentator, died of an aortic aneurysm, which normally affects much older people. We know that it affects the arterial walls with that's the spike protein. It causes inflammation, and therefore you can get these blowing up of the blood vessels to make these aneurysms.
God.
So you can expect the same sort of thing occurring within the brain, and especially to your point about the changes in behavior, that implies this is the frontal lobe, and the blood vessels, the vascularity to the frontal lobes isn't that good anyway. And so when you get things like microvessel disease, little microclots occurring, then you are going to get lots of little microstrokes that may not be visible on any type of imaging, so that we can prove that it's that. I mean, I think.
And could that, Dr. Flowers, forgive my ignorance, could a lot of inflammation or tiny microstrokes in the brain cause personality changes or cognitive?
Absolutely, if it affects the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes, if you remember, there was a very barbaric old-fashioned treatment. One flew over the cuckoo's nest, for example. They used to do a frontal lobotomy. They basically cut off the frontal lobe to pacify the really aggressive sociopath in prison. I think that's against the human court of
well, and yet it's being done.
And yet it's being done in a different manner.
In a different way. Well, I have to go there. I have to ask about this. The notable thing about people who had frontal lobe lobotomies is how compliant they were, that their critical thinking facilities died, that they were tractable, they could be, managed better institutionally. That's why the critique of who got lobotomized was early on a feminist critique, because it was disproportionately women who were angry about things who were being lobotomized. Let me ask you this. If these injections, this mechanism could possibly affect the prefrontal cortex, right? Couldn't that explain the mysterious, or help to explain, or be a possible explanation for the mysterious death of critical thinking we're seeing in the vaccinated?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a potential real cause, a pathological cause for it. But it also, I think the theory of mass formation psychosis, I think, is a real type of event. And we're getting compliant populations. Certainly, those that are vaccinated seem to be very compliant, but we don't know. Is it chicken and egg? Because those sort of people tended to be compliant beforehand. So yes, it's a possible thing.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess what I would, and again, I'm thinking as a cultural critic, right? With horrible social change, often there are multiple causes happening simultaneously. And could an already, a population whose brains, a significant number, or even a small number, are already inflamed, compromised in the area where we are human, basically, and can think critically, can resist, can ask questions, combined with the propaganda. I respectfully resist the phrasing of mass formation psychosis without a lot of caveats, because for a lot of reasons, but one of them is it's a reprise of Wilhelm Reich's book and Hannah Arendt's book, which I think should always be credited, but leaving that aside, that's kind of an academic note. The two things could work together, right? Like what would happen if all of this bombardment of propaganda was aimed at people whose prefrontal cortexes were not inflamed and were not degraded in any way? It might roll off of them the way it's rolled off of many of us, right? So I'm I'm not saying that the degradation of the prefrontal cortex is the goal of the injection, but as a cultural critic, I am noting, and as someone who has, studied the management of the mentally ill and the pathologicization of, critical thinking over the course of the last 200 years for subject populations, especially whether they were enslaved people or women, serfs, I just think it's very, very interesting that Pfizer knew that there could be brain damage. I mean, that's really what we're seeing here. A stroke can cause brain damage, right? Let's not,
Absolutely.
can cause brain damage.
By definition.
Right? And they kept going.
Right.
Brain damage, and they kept going, right? To me, this, as a cultural critic, that is super important. The evidence is right here. I know it's not your job to tease out the social or cultural implications that way, but I'm not overstating it, right? Pfizer knew that 275 people sustained a thing that can lead to brain damage, and they kept going. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
I think so. But I think one of the ways we can answer this sort of thing as well is if people follow, Ryan Cole's suggestion that they do immunohistochemical stains, that's just an antigen antibody test on pathology when they do postmortems of brains.
Right.
People
And
who
what
die suddenly,
what will that find? I don't understand.
Well, what that does is it just shows up the spike protein. Where is the spike protein? What is the distribution? How long does it remain there for? Those are basic questions. People said, oh, the spike protein would only last for a couple of months.
Yeah, I remember
maximum,
that.
and that's been shown not to be the case.
Right.
And in fact, the last report that was done about the lymph nodes showed that the spike protein was present in the lymph nodes at 6 months to the same extent it was originally. But there was no follow-up done. So we don't even know what's happened 2 years later.
Right.
Are the spike proteins still there? Because they're the problematic physical thing.
And Naomi, I would also highlight that not only did they keep going, they made no effort to inform the public. That's both on Pfizer and the FDA, who knew. And then they tried to bury the documents so that they wouldn't have to be forthright at all.
Wow.
So no one would ever know.
No one would ever know. People would keep dropping dead or having strokes. And I can tell you in my own friends circle, people who have had strokes, the doctors are like, we have no idea what caused this. There's no knowledge of this whatsoever. Well, you've all been very generous with your time. This is an unbelievable, sobering, shocking revelation, yet another great service to humanity. Is there anything you want to say in the final minute, or two before we have to sign off and get this video out everywhere we can? Dr. Kelly, any final thoughts?
Oh, I like that you call me Dr. Kelly.
I'm so sorry. Amy Kelly, Ms. Kelly.
Oh, no.
Dr. Flowers. You can tell I need a second cup of coffee, right? But it's also like, I'll just be honest, processing this information emotionally is very challenging. And if I made a mistake or held my puppy, who otherwise would have barked, sorry about that. Forgive me. This is like, it's like walking through, it's like they're opening the gates of Auschwitz. And here's Dr. Mengele's lab. I mean, I really feel that way. Amy Kelly, Ms. Kelly, DailyClout COO, any final thoughts from you?
I think this series of reports that's coming out are so important. I encourage everyone to go actually look at the report. It's one page. It's easy to go through and digest the information. And I'm so thankful to Dr. Flowers and the post-marketing team. There's your puppy, who have taken this approach to doing these and making it accessible to everyone.
Yeah, so important. And Dr. Flowers, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, again, I want to just give a big shout out to my team who've been working on this. I can tell you, we've got a lot of reports that we've been working on. I've been going through, making sure everything is validated, about to come to your desk. But I really want to, and even though they want to remain anonymous, so I can't say who they are by name, but I want to recognize these very important people, many of whom have actually done retired academics,
Right.
They're people from all different backgrounds who've got a passion for revealing the truth.
Yeah.
I just want to give them a shout out because
Absolutely.
they do a huge amount of work in the background that
I know.
provides you with all the reports that we can.
Dr. Flowers, I also want to give them a huge shout out. I hope someday I get to meet them and thank them personally. And in the meantime, I just can't tell you enough. I just want everyone to know, like, these people are working pro bono for the service of humanity, and there are thousands of them, and it's literally the most beautiful and magical project I've ever heard of, let alone been privileged to witness, at one remove. And I kind of don't even understand how it proceeds. It's like you guys have the wind at your back, like in a kind of unbelievable state of grace. But that wouldn't be happening if it weren't for all these individuals doing the right thing, just for truth and for humanity. What a miracle. And I'm so grateful to all of you. And everyone, please, if you're watching this, know that it is very expensive to produce these reports, even though these heroes and heroines are working for free. We have fixed costs, we have hosting costs, we have editorial costs, we have social media costs, we have distribution costs, we have staffing costs, and those we cannot escape. And we could not bring you these amazing reports without your help. So whether it's $5 or $500 or whatever you can afford, I hate to ask for money, but I need to keep these reports coming out into the world. And also separately, we have giant legal fees because these people have brought out reports that are harming one of the biggest industries on earth. And we also have a lawsuit against Pfizer based on this fraud and injury to people. So we need your help with our legal bills as well. So please go to dailyclout.io, become members if you want to support us, subscribe. If you can't afford to become a member, it's all part of our community. And think of us, when you want to make a donation, because we really survive with your help. Thank you all. It's Dr. Naomi Wolf, and this has been the distinguished, amazing Dr. Chris Flowers and the equally amazing and remarkable Amy Kelly of DailyClout. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.